Good evening, good afternoon to all of you who are here. It's an honor to be the last speaker for 18 hours for the year 2020. For tonight, we will be discussing how do we start using HL7 FHIR. The discussion tonight will be more of a storytelling. I will be sharing experiences that we had as a lab when we supported organizations, countries in their use of the HL7 FHIR standard. Okay, just a disclaimer, all the opinions, views that will be shared by the presenter, that will be shared by me are purely my own and does not represent the opinion, the views of the organization that I represent. So, um, so what will be our agenda for tonight? So number one, I will give a very, very quick introduction to HL7 FHIR. The goal of this presentation is to discuss how organizations will start using FHIR. I would assume that you must have heard, you must have learned HL7 FHIR from somewhere else. But in case you are not yet familiar with this standard, I will be sharing to you a very, very quick introduction. It's a 90-second introduction to HL7 FHIR. Okay, and then I think the main part of my presentation for tonight is to discuss, basically to answer the question, how do we start using HL7 FHIR? And then we want to answer, what do we need to know in order for us to start using FHIR? So what capacity do we need? What resources do we need to use FHIR? And finally, number 5, it's a question that I will leave to the group. So what's next? So after we have decided to use HL7 FHIR, what will be the next thing that will be done by us? I always like start every time I give a talk about HL7 FHIR, I always want to show this video. This slide. Basically, this tells us that the world is actually on fire. So this is an atlas showing the various location where the Happy Fire server is being used all over the world. Okay, and I have been looking at this atlas for the past 2-3 years. When we started engaging with the Happy Fire team, most of the usage are in the, let me use my pointer, most of the usage were in the American continent and in the European continent. And during the past, I think 3 years, we have seen a lot of usage in the Asia Pacific region. So I think we can say that HL7 FHIR has really been has spread all over the world. So at the same time, the biggest technology companies, Microsoft, Google, Apple, even Amazon, they have their own FHIR implementation server already. So there's really a huge traction in the use of FHIR all over the world. And during the last virtual FHIR Dev Day, last November, there was a virtual FHIR Dev Day. So it was virtual because, as we all know, we are in a pandemic. There's this very interesting quote from Graham Greave, who is the father of FHIR. So he said that actually right now, HL7, the standard, is the one that is actually the fuel that is running the world right now. So imagine if the various clinical systems that we have right now in each of the countries are not using standard, are not communicating with one another, then imagine how difficult, well, we are in a difficult scenario right now, but how more difficult it will be if there's no communication between the different information systems. So I agree that right now we are in a period of time where HL7 is very important, and and in particular, given the development all over the world, we can actually say that HL7 FHIR is a very important standard that we need to adapt during these days. So, when I started with my talk, I promised that I will be giving a very quick introduction to the HL7 star standard. So at this stage, I will be sharing a YouTube video that we developed in order to give a very quick introduction to fire. So let me open it up. So there's no explanation in the video. Basically, the video is just a quick explainer video, so it's only composed of text. So if you hear the music background, that's good. But if you don't hear anything, that's also okay. You just need to look at what is in the video. So it's only around 90 seconds, so it is very quick. Yeah, so let me share it. Okay, I hope you learned something from the video. So the goal of that video is to just to give a very quick introduction to HL7 Fire. So basically HL7 Fire, well, it's a standard because it defines how data can be formatted, how data that is being shared between clinical systems can be formatted. However, the biggest difference it has with the other HL7 standards is HL7 file is not only a standard, it also defines the way of how data will be sent from one application to another. So it uses REST APIs. So if you are familiar with REST APIs, basically that's how HL7 file works. Another thing, it is also a way to understand and model clinical data. So FHIR itself has a schema of how the various clinical objects like a patient, a practitioner, an organization can be set up, and it already identifies the various data fields that are inside those objects. FHIR is also a collection of tools that can be used to send data. So later on, we will be sharing a lot of tools that were developed by the FHIR community. So we already have servers, we already have validators. So that's how robust HL7 FHIR is. And finally, again, I will be copying this idea from the talk from the closing remarks of Graham Greaves during the last FHIR Dev Day. FHIR is also a community. There's a lot of materials, there's a lot of experts that are available online and who are very willing to help us. whenever we have problems, whenever we need technical expertise on HL7 FHIR. So there's actually a very big community of developers, of clinicians who are working on this standard. So yeah, I agree with Graham when he said that it is a community. So maybe at this stage, we will now go to the part where we will discuss the main question for our webinar tonight. So how do we start with FHIR? Before we answer that question, we need to look at 2 points of view. So we have the technology adoption perspective. Because if you are a technologist, if you are an EMR developer, if you are an app developer, you will look at FHIR as a technology, as a way of sending data from one system to another. So if you will be starting with FHIR from that perspective, you will be looking at the technology stack of HL7 FHIR. So the answer to the question, how will you start using FHIR, that will be a little bit different as compared if you are a clinical organization. If you have a clinic, if you are a clinician, if you are running a hospital, if you are from the Ministry of Health and you want to adopt HL7 FHIR, there's a separate things that you need to know in order for you to start using the HL7 FHIR standard. So I for this webinar, I will be separating those 2 perspectives. So let's start with the technology perspective. So let's put ourselves in the as if we are EMR or app developer. So how can we start using the HL7 FHIR standard? So you're a CEO of of a software company that has an EMR or has an application. So how do you start with the FHIR standard? But the first thing you need to learn is that there are actually 2 common adoption models on FHIR. Number 1 is you have an application. So you already have an existing application and you don't want to modify that application. So you want to minimize the changes that you will do on that application. However, you need to integrate with other FHIR compliant solutions. So what will you do? So from what we have seen, what the common adoption model there is, you will keep the application, so there will be no changes in the application. You will keep your database. So the application will use the database. So basically this has been existing before your adoption. So in order for you to incorporate FHIR to your existing system, the usual model is we will set up a FHIR server outside of your application, and your application database will connect to that FHIR server. And that FHIR server will be the one that will connect to the other applications. Okay? So in this scenario, you will minimize the changes that you will need to do in the application itself. The only change that you will need to work on are the API consumers from the database that you have to the FHIR server. Other than that, this will be replicated. So if you already have an existing solution, you don't need to modify it a lot to adapt the HL7 FHIR standard. Usually, you just need a FHIR server that will handle the APIs. So under this model, what do you need to do? Number 1, of course, you will need to set up a FHIR server. So you will need to have some expertise in setting up a FHIR server. And there are a lot of FHIR servers available that are free. So later on, I will be sharing to you some of the freely available servers that are available online. And then you just need to set up an API consumer at the database side. So we just need to set up this API consumers so that you can connect your database to your FHIR server. So basically, this is the only programming that you will need to do. Number 3, and this is one of the most powerful feature of HL7 FHIR. HL7 FHIR has a subscription resource that can be used to send data externally. So in the next slide, I will dig deeper to the subscription resource. But this is a powerful resource because it allows your server, so it allows your server here to be easily integrated with other existing FHIR servers. Because usually, if we will not use subscription, so every time you have a you change something in this FHIR server, you need to automate. You need to send a trigger to the other servers that you had to change something here. So what FHIR subscription does is it automates it for you. So I will share it in the next slide. Number 4, and this is something that I think is worth mentioning. If you are not modifying your application, you might want to consider looking at FHIR data warehouse architecture. So there FHIR HL7 FHIR itself is architecture agnostic. It can work in any architecture. However, there are some data warehouse architecture where HL7 FHIR can easily fit in. So if you are planning to modify your application and if you are planning to set up a FHIR server here, it will be good if you can study, if you can look at some models for FHIR warehouses. And finally, if you are not modifying the FHIR server that you will be using, so if you are using the reference FHIR server here, like if you are using a happy FHIR server directly, then you don't need, so that means that you will be using the full FHIR specifications, then you don't need to set up any implementation guide. Okay, so the architecture should, the server should, and the documentation of FHIR should work perfectly. So what do we want to say here? If you are only modifying your application to make it FHIR compliant, there should be very minimal work on your side. So it's not as if you will do modeling or those things. So just to give you an introduction to the FHIR subscription resource. So the FHIR subscription resource, which is a resource in FHIR, it automates the transfer of data from one FHIR server to another FHIR server. So if we will be using the FHIR subscription resource here, which is part of the current version of HL7 FHIR, then the transfer of data from this server to this server is already automatic. You just need to specify the endpoint, so you just need to specify the URL of this server, and then the transfer should be automatic. So this is one resource that EMR developers or app developers should consider using when they are implementing the HL7 FHIR standard. So going back, so I said earlier that there are 2 common models in adapting FHIR. So the first one, let me review. The first one is you already have an existing application. You will just put a FHIR server that will encapsulate, that will wrap the application. So that is the first solution. The second solution, of course, is if you are just starting off with your EMR, if you are just at the point where you want to develop a new EMR and you want to use FHIR, then it is definitely advised that you use FHIR as the back end of your application. So if you have an application here, so you have the user interface here, the common model is to use the lightweight architecture where you will only define the interface here, and everything else will be a file server here. So you have a file server, you will have a database, but the idea here is all the data models that you have here should already be compliant to FHIR. So the beauty here is FHIR has already defined your database schema. FHIR has already set up your model. It's only a matter of setting up your application, setting up your user interface so that it will be in sync with the FHIR server. So that's why it's actually very easy to develop mobile applications right now with using an HL7 FHIR backend, because you just need to think of the interface. Everything else you can use a FHIR server. So, and then of course the FHIR server will be the one that will connect to the various databases, to the external FHIR servers. So what do you need to learn? What do you need to know if you are using this model? If you are building a FHIR application from scratch? Number one, obviously, is you need, well, this time, you need to really work with clinicians. So this is a time where clinicians and technologies should work together, because you should model your application using FHIR. So it is imperative that you have a good background in FHIR modeling. So in the first scenario, you don't need to model any that much, because you already have an application, you already have a database. However, in the second scenario, it is imperative that you do a FHIR model. You need to model your workflow so that it will sink in the FHIR objects. Number two, it is also good to set up a FHIR server. However, there are applications that I have seen where they don't have a FHIR server here. What they have is a database, and then they just follow the FHIR format. That is perfectly okay. However, based from our experience, it's more challenging to set up a FHIR-based application if you don't use the existing FHIR servers right now, because you are basically reinventing the wheel. Okay, so yeah, so and then number three, since you are building an application from scratch, you may need to write an implementation guide so that the various applications that will integrate to you will be able to connect. So if you can see, in the first model, you just need to set up a server. So you need to have background, you need to know how to set up a server. In the second model, since you are building your application from scratch, you need to know how to model using HL7 FHIR. You need to set up a server, and you might need to set up an implementation guide. So starting with the FHIR standard for the first model is a little bit easier because you already have an application. However, development in this model, in the second model, is quite faster because you are basically following the FHIR standard already. So what are the key technical issues when we start using the FHIR standard? Number one, and this is something that you need to think very carefully, where will you start? Where will you store the data? So in both models, as you can see, there's a database component. Okay, so it is possible that number one, you use a separate database, so you have a FHIR server and then you have a separate database. That's a good model. However, technically, the FHIR server itself has an internal database already. Okay, while I know that there are some FHIR servers like the Happy FHIR server where they discourage people from using the internal database as the main database. So they have so if you are using the HappyFire server, the optimal model is you separate the database from the fire server itself. But yeah, it's a technical decision that you will need to discuss. Do we want to use the fire server to store our data, or we will only use it as a gateway? So those things should be discussed before you start your development. Of course, if you already have an existing system, you should also discuss whether you should change the architecture of your system so that the fire server will fit in. So will you put the fire server in a load balancer? So those things, those need to be discussed when you start using the fire standard. Another thing, you need to discuss which resource should you adapt. Do you extend? Do you use fire extension or do you use questionnaire responses? So fire is a very flexible standard and it will work whenever you choose if you choose to use the extension or if you choose to use the questionnaire, or it will work whatever your architecture is. But it is important that we should be able to put it into context. So we want to have the optimal use of the fire standard. To summarize, so we are in the first part, we are looking at fire on the technical level. So if you are an EMR developer or an app developer, if you want to start using the fire standard, it is important that you know how to set up a fire server. It is important that you know the different fire architectures, and it is important that you can fully understand fire APIs. So that is for the first perspective. And then now we look at the second perspective. So for example, you have a clinic or you are running a hospital. How can you start with adapting the HL7 FHIR standard? So in the earlier perspective, we look at fire in a more technical perspective. So now we will be looking at fire and how it can be adapted in a more clinical organizational perspective. So number one, for example, you are running a clinic or a primary care clinic where you only have an EMR. So the only thing that you need to have, since this is only a clinic, you don't have all the systems, you only need to have an EMR. Okay, so basically the only system that you have here is an EMR. So you just collect medical records. However, the usual scenario is, so if you are only a clinic and you have an EMR, then you should be fine. That's okay. You can do your practice. You can maximize the use of your EMR. However, you will come at a scenario where your EMR will need to connect to external systems. For example, your EMR will need to connect to the Ministry of Health, or your EMR will need to connect to the National Insurance for claims processing. So initially, you have your EMR and it's working perfectly, but as what we are seeing right now, we need to connect it with external servers. And assuming that those external servers are using FHIR, that is the time when we should consider how your EMR would connect to those FHIR systems. So to start using FHIR, number one, again, because the context is the reason why we are using FHIR is because we need to connect from external systems. So number one, you need to identify what are those systems. Are we connecting to the national insurance? Are we connecting to the various disease registry? Are we connecting to the country's HIE? So we need to identify what are those systems that we need to connect with. Number two, we need to request for a copy of the implementation guide of this organization. So if we are implementing FHIR and we want other systems to connect to our systems, then it is important that we define an implementation guide, especially if we are modifying, if we are extending FHIR. And number three, obviously, if we will modify the EMR so that they can use the FHIR API. So basically, it will be the job of the developers to modify the EMR. So, but it is important. So from a, if you are a clinic and you are thinking of using FHIR, the two things that you need to know is number one, you need to identify the system where you will connect. And number two, you need to have an implementation guide. So once you have those two things, the only thing that's left is you need a programmer that knows how to program APIs. Okay? So you don't need to model anything because basically the implementation guide already models that for you. It already tells you what data are needed. So for a primary care clinic or for an individual clinic, the main thing that you need to do if you want to use FHIR is to basically just open your EMR and then make it consume the external FHIR API. So it should not be that hard. The more challenging scenario is when we're talking with hospitals. Because when we're talking with hospitals, we are not talking about EMRs now. So we are now talking about admission module, an EMR module, a laboratory module, a pharmacy module. Usually hospitals will have billing and financial module, room management, human resource information system, claims management, and all of these things should be integrated. So this is where you will use FHIR to integrate all these systems internally. If you only have a primary care clinic, you just need to connect to an external system. But if we are talking about hospitals, we need to connect these things internally. So, well, one model that we can use is basically we put a FHIR server in between these applications. They will connect to this FHIR server, and the FHIR server will be the one that will host the FHIR APIs. Okay. It is possible that we put a database here where all the data will be stored. That's okay. Another model is we keep the databases with their respective applications, so that's also okay. So again, this will be an architecture question. So that's step number 3. You need to design your architecture. So if the hospital would want to adopt FHIR, it's not as easy as the primary clinics that we were discussing earlier. So number 1, if you are a hospital and you want to start use FHIR, you need to model your workflow. So you need to do FHIR modeling. So in the earlier scenario, you just need to plug in. In this scenario, you need to do your model. Number 2, is you need to set up the necessary infrastructure. So are you using a data warehouse? Where will you put your server? Are you using the cloud? So those things, you need to discuss it in the hospital. And number 3, and this is inevitable, you need to redesign your architecture. You need to make sure that your architecture and the FHIR standard will work together. Okay, so there's really a bigger challenge for hospitals when they adopt FHIR because it's a lot more complex. So what do you need to know to start using FHIR? Number 1, of course, you need to have a strong competency in HL7 FHIR. So in the earlier scenario, you just need one programmer who knows how to do basic API programming. In this scenario, you will need to have an IT team that is good in FHIR. you need to set up, you need to have the capacity to modify fire server. You need to have the capacity to model clinical workflow. So these things, if you are a hospital and you are thinking of adopting fire, these are the things that you need to have. And number 4, you need to consider setting up testing and certification, because we know that in hospitals there are many EMR vendors, system vendors. So before you bring them in, you have to make sure that they are compliant with the FHIR standard, that they can connect to the infrastructure that you set up. So so that is how different this one with the earlier model that we have. So what are the resources needed? Of course, you will need to identify servers. You need to have a sysadmin or a database admin that knows how to configure a FHIR server. You need to have clinicians with intensive FHIR background that can model FHIR workflows. So those are the resources needed when you are setting up FHIR in a hospital. Now we look at the national perspective. So for example, I am from the Ministry of Health. So how can I start? How can my country start using the HL7 FHIR standard? So number 1 is you need to set up a national FHIR infrastructure. So you need to set up FHIR servers if you will be using FHIR servers. Of course, if the Ministry of Health, if the country will adopt HL7 FHIR, the first organization that will adopt it should be the Ministry of Health. So the disease registries, the patient registry, all those open HIE components that we are familiar with, those should be set up with the FHIR standard. You need to have a FHIR server there. So that's the first thing. Number 2, and this is very important. And personally, for me, I think this is the most important work. We need to define an implementation guide and a national FHIR profile. So countries like the United States or Netherlands, so they have embraced FHIR completely. They have their own national FHIR profile. So basically, they were able to localize the FHIR standards based on their need. Remember, one of the principles in HL7 FHIR is the 80-20 principle, where you will use the core FHIR components. 80% of your profile will be from the core component, and then the remaining 20% you will extend. So that is what the FHIR profile will define. You need to localize it. You need to define. You need to develop an implementation guide so that the developers in your country will be using that implementation guide whenever they are trying to connect or whenever they are trying to use FHIR locally. Number 3 is important that the national HIE must be modeled with the FHIR resources in mind. So I was looking at the latest Open HIE architecture, and yeah, they are already they have already put FHIR in that architecture. So I think we are now at a stage where we should revisit our national HIEs and see how we can put in the FHIR standard there. Number 4 is we need to set up a governing body for the adoption of FHIR. So there should be one body who will define, who will localize FHIR, who will develop the implementation guide, who will develop the national FHIR profile. And since they are a governing body, whatever they say, whatever they standardize, it will be followed all over the country. And number 5 is you need to develop technical, you need to have a group. So it will be very hard to increase the capacity, the FHIR capacity in the country if we don't have a core group of trainers, a core community that will serve as the catalyst. So basically, the catalyst will be the one who will organize the workshop, who will bring in the expertise, who will organize connect-a-thons. In some countries, for example, in India, they have an HL7 India, and that's the one leading the adoption of FHIR. In Thailand, they have the Thai FHIR community. So that community is the one that is leading the adoption of FHIR in that country. So those are the models that we have seen that is working. In Vietnam, that the e-health administration has adopted FHIR, and they have been increasing the capacity of the department of the office, so that eventually, when you need to train the EMR developers, the hospital, you already have that core group of trainers. So I think that for the last 5-10 minutes, so let me share with you. So how do we start with FHIR? So there's a lot of resources available online. So I was looking at the HL7 FHIR wiki, so they have a rich resources of FHIR materials. FHIRly, so the organizers of FHIR Dev Days, they also have a rich set of materials. So what we did in Sheila is we developed a starter toolkit. So basically, the starter toolkit, we envisioned it to be a repository of all the available materials that we can see online, so that if you want to start with FHIR, you don't need to search the internet. You already have a single repository where all the materials are there, where all the tools are there. So let me share it with you. Where is it? Here. So I will be sharing the URL via the chat, so that if you want to look at it, it will be easy to search. Let me share it right now here. Okay, so basically the starter toolkit, the goal of the starter toolkit. So I will just walk through this. So if you want to look at this deeper, so you can open the URL. So basically, the goal of this is to have a repository of materials that you can use in order for you to start using the FHIR standard. So the first thing that we place in the FHIR starter toolkit is a comparison of standards. Because when we are discussing FHIR with various government agencies, the first thing that they ask is how different is FHIR with other standards. Okay, so we created a document that shows the difference of the various HL7 standards. So we have here V2, we have here V3, we have here CDA, and we have here FHIR. So we place here the benefits. And then we actually have a comparison. So so we have a table that compares the features of HL7 V2 with V3, with CDA, and with FHIR. So I know that some of us here are working with the Ministry of Health, and we need to explain to our higher ups how different this FHIR standard is with other standards. We have summarized it so that it will be easier to explain. Number two is we know that the most important component when starting with FHIR is capacity building. We need to develop capacity. So what we are doing here is we are compiling some of the good resource materials that are available online. So we have here the various presentations from Dev Days. So if you want to review these presentations, so we have placed it here. We are also sharing here the YouTube channel of the HL7 FHIR community. So if you want to learn, you can go to this channel. We also have a basic FHIR tutorial. So if you want to just learn FHIR quickly, this is a good tutorial. And the source code is available in GitHub. We have the FHIR cheat sheet, We have here the fire developer course. And then we also have here a documentation of how to run your own fire workshop. So for example, you want to organize a fire workshop in your country. We have documented here some of the experiences that we had when we organize our own fire workshop. So we are basically sharing our experiences here. We also have example syllabus. So yeah, so the first thing you need to know is how to learn. So we have placed here various learning materials on HL7 FHIR. The next thing you need to do is to identify the tools. What server will you use? So those things, so we have placed here links to the various servers that you can set up. So we have here a HappyFire server that we place on Docker so that it will be easy for you to set it up. So you can download the Dockerized version of the HappyFire server using our GitHub. Of course, we also have here the HappyFire server. So we have links to the HL7 server. We also have links to Simplifier. So if you are developing a profile, so you need to use Simplifier or you need to use Forge. So you already have it in the starter toolkit. We also have some testing tools. So if you need to do fire testing, the testing tool from the ONC is a good testing tool, although they are only at STU3 so right now. But this is a good way of testing your fire implementation. There's also a resource validation core from Clean Fire. So basically here you will just put your resource. You will select which version and which server to use. And then you will easily validate the resource that you have. So yeah, so this is our tool is basically a compilation of tools and materials. We also have a list of HL7 FHIR servers that are available online. So it will be good to look at this. And then we are also sharing how HL7 FHIR is being adopted by various applications like OpenMRS, ISO, OpenIMIS. So if you are using these technologies, we have some information on those. We have fire profiling. We also have a material on testing. We also place some country examples like the US Argonaut, the national base profile of Netherlands, of Germany. So yeah, the goal of this page is to help countries, organizations start using the FHIR standard. So, and this is a work in progress. So we are still working on this document. If you want to contribute some content, we will be very happy to put it in here. And of course, we will acknowledge you. But yeah, so hopefully, we a lot of people in this call will try to look at this website. So going back to my slide, I think I'm down to my last slide. So I think as I mentioned earlier, that one of the biggest thing about HL7 FHIR is it's a community. And as a community, it's very important that we get to document whatever we are doing. So if you are doing a national FHIR implementation, then please share it so that we can put it here so that our community can see it, so that our community can learn from it. So we should be able to foster that community idea on FHIR by documenting our work, even if it's only small, and sharing it to the community. So I think that's it. So we hope that as we move along, so I will just go back to my first slide. So as we move along, we hope that we can see more areas in our map. So we hope that we can see an increase in adoption in our region with the use on the use of HL7 FHIR. So I think that's it. Thank you very much. Do you have questions?
Thank you, Sir Phil. I think Dr. Fazila has something to share from
Yeah,
Malaysia.
sure.
Hi, Philip.
Hello, Dr. Fasila.
How are you?
I'm good. How are
Yeah,
you?
I'm good, good. Thank you so much. I just wanted to ask, we are planning to do our HIE platform, a new one for our nationwide EMR project. It will start next year. So we would like to have the fire compliant HIE platform. But but our systems in hospitals and the clinics where we are going to connect them are still on HL7 compliant. They are not fire
Yeah.
based. So how will that work? How will that integration happen?
Well, I will share something. I'm looking where's the architecture. Let me share something. That the problem that you were discussing, Dr. Fahila, is actually common in other countries. They are already 607 compliant, version
Okay.
2, version 3.
Uh-huh.
However, this one. However, they want to use fire. So there's this architectural pattern. So I'm sharing for you the link.
Oh, okay.
I'm sharing the link to our chat. And in one of this architecture,
Mm-hmm.
it shows how we can, yeah, this one. So you can use a fire broker where if a hospital is using V2, or
Mm-hmm.
if a hospital is using V3, or if it's using fire, you will just put a broker in the middle.
Uh-huh.
So this one will be connected to your HIE,
Oh,
and this will
okay.
be the one that will convert the messages to fire or to V2, so that the hospital won't need to do their modifications.
I see. So we can remain the system that's already existing, but just use a broker in between.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fazila and Sir Phil. I think there are no other questions yet, but I saw a message from Dr. Chaminda. Maybe Dr. Chaminda can share from Sri Lanka.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for the great presentation. A lot of interesting stuff. And we are also thankful that AHIN supported fire training for some of our guys. Dr. Niranga and Dr. Roshan um, participated, and they actually started a project where we are actually developing the national fire profiles.
That's good.
And we are also looking at setting up a national electronic health record, as well as converting we have two main EMRs in our state hospitals, converting them to fire compliant as well. So I think in currently we have many millions of records in isolation. We would like to have them into a national EMR. We have already identified the minimum clinical data set, and we are doing the file profiles to accommodate the minimum clinical data set. So
Yeah,
that's our progress now.
yeah, that's very exciting work. So just let us know if you will need support. We can support that work.
Thank you so much. Yes, we'll reach out to you. Thank
Uh,
you.
Sorry, can I ask a question to Chaminda?
Sure.
Chaminda, yeah, but you have you want to convert the two EMR in the hospitals to fire compliant. But
Yes.
if we look into what is shown on the screen here, and what mentioned by Philip,
Yes.
do we really have to convert it, or can we just
No,
leave
I
that?
think your situation and ours is a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
The current EMRs are not even version 3
HS.
compliant.
Oh, okay,
So
okay, all right.
basically, we don't need to go for
Yeah,
V3 and a broker. We can straight away upgrade
yeah,
them to Fire.
yeah, correct. Okay, great.
Yes, thank you, doctors and Sir Philip. Before we end, maybe we can hear a few words from Sir Philip and Dr. Bunsay.
Maybe Dr. Bunsai first. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, Dr.
Uh,
Bunsai.
Hello. Thank you very much, Professor Phillips, for this great presentation. And I think you have created the fires in Asia. That is a good thing that we are going as a community to help each other and sharing all of the resources. And thank you for the integrated and or accumulate all the fire resources in one place,
Yeah.
and it's easy to access from the visit to this site. I am looking for this, and I think this is a very good tools, at least the starting tool for everyone to starting this. And what I hope is that the Philippines, Saila will do, the demonstration of the using fire in the real life, like another countries in Philippines also. That would be another. I think the one that we can looking for as a model, like the COVID-19 that you have present yesterday. I know from our secretariat that this session is the last session of our CLMV webinar. We have to thank our sponsor, McGowan Foundation. They are very generous to support us all the tools to kind of this kind of the platform of the education. If we don't have the COVID, so we maybe have an opportunity to meet with this support from the foundation face to face. But thinking another way that because of the COVID, it make us to adapt to this kind of the bigger bigger challenge, and then it help us to adapt to this educational thing to have the building capacity. But we will not stop the webinar. We still have the AHIN webinar, and we will working with our partner or developing partner to kind of the help our community, the AHIN, to kind of the build our sharing knowledge and also capacity. And fire will be one of the things that we will learning together, like the gaps framework that we have. We as a community has come up and learning from our experience to give you the because of we have a lot of audience from our network, to give you the information that gaps has been mentioned by many regions, and we are very proud that we are this kind of the framework are initiated in our network. So before before we end up this, Dr. Fasila, would you like to say something to the communities? And okay.
Yeah, I think Buncha, maybe Ahin, we can start lighting up the fire to our region, because I think a lot of us are already moving into fire compliant solutions. So yeah, creating like what Philip mentioned, creating a community will be good. And if next year we can continue back the fire training like what we had in 2019 will be great, Bunchai. And I'm not sure if Alwin is online. Yeah. So thank you again to Phillips for this presentation.
Hello. Before we close this session, I would like to say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to all our network and our member. Even we can only celebrate in our among our family. It might be luckier than in the European and America that they cannot even travel because of they has a lot of epidemics. But
Yeah.
keep everyone safe
Yeah.
and let's continue to engage to our collaboration next year. And don't forget to register for our big event, the general in general meetings. We will have the virtual similar to this on 7, 14, 21, and 28 January. And I think many of you already see the schedule. So please register and then tell your friend to come and meet our friend even online. Our following general meeting, we maybe has a chance to meet in person after we have the COVID has been subside. Hello, I think I saw Dr. Alvin. Alvin, could you say something because we closed our session?
Hello, Dr. Bunchay. Thank you, Philip. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Let's greet everyone Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And I don't know if we have another webinar, but if not, let's meet again for our general meeting. But please keep online, check your email and your Viber messages for instructions before the general meeting. Thank you, everyone. Good
Thank
evening. Good
you.
night.